Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm wearing my Dune t-shirt, my Surf Arrakis t-shirt. Not because I've rushed out to see the Dune sequel, because I didn't like the first one. I'm not going to see the second one, whatever people say. Socks is here. Can you see him? There. Oh, he's jumped down. He's feeling much better and he's happy because he has a new cat flap. And he's realised it's the same outside still, but other cats can't get in. And his cat flap is very fancy. Um, and he can see out of it. Bit disconcerted at first, but he's happy. Now, today, I want to talk about science fiction because, and that's why I've got my Dune t shirt on. I was going to make a pile of my 10 favourite science fiction novels or books. It's become rather more than that. Probably too many to talk about in one video. I'm stacking up these piles of books, but I'll see how far I get. See how much I talk about each one. I might just hold up the covers and tell you to go and find them. Right, now, some of these I've talked about before in other videos, but it doesn't matter. The concept, the idea for this video is these are my favourite science fiction books. Science fiction fantasy, because I think the lines are so blurred in those genres, it doesn't matter. You can't gatekeep between genres. That's just silly. And this, one of my all-time favourites, comes from a science fiction bookshop in Darlington that I've talked about before, where everything was about 75p, and the year was about 1992, and everything came from America, and they had every single genre you could think of, everything stacked high, and it was bliss, down by the marketplace in Darlington. And this is The Land of Laughs by Jonathan Carroll. It is spooky, dark fantasy, really. About a man who goes to write a biography of a kids author, a kind of Maurice Sendak kind of kids author, and it's very spooky. Tears of the Singers, of course, by Melinda Snodgrass, my favourite ever Star Trek novel, the one about the seals endangered on this planet and Uhura having lots of sex with Rick Wakeman in the future as he plays his organ. Also in my top 10. These are all tie-in. Well, these are tie-ins anyway. E.T. and the Book of the Green Planet is one of my favourite science fiction novels there ever has been. Well, I read it in the summer of 1985, and it's it's the sequel to E.T. It's phantasmagorical. Somewhere I've got the illustrated version, which, oh, it's here, look, that I found many years later after reading this, and I'd seen this and didn't buy it because I loved the cover art, and same fella did lots of uh, illustrated by David Wiesner. Um, these beautiful color illustrations of all the creatures on E.T.'s world, and they're funny and quirky. You get flashbacks to the people at home on Earth as well. It's a fantastic book. I've got a note in the front. Chapter 8 is the one where they go to the disco for plants and get drunk on beer. And there's a Mary is on Earth having a date, and she gets drunk as well. So chapter 8 is the one to look out for. Right, that's in my top 10. What else? This I didn't read till quite recently. Constellations, Stories of the Future from 1983, and edited by Malcolm Edwards, containing some of my favourite science fiction short stories. This was published by Windmills, that did lots and lots of school books. And their list of the things they publish for schools is just astonishing. Best reading list in the world, really, in some ways. But that's a fantastic book. Puffin did an edition as well, and you've got to go and look for it. It's got Beyond Lies of the Wub by Philip K. Dick. Best science fiction story I think I know. And Let's Go to Golgotha by, oh, his name's gone. That's terrible. I'm sorry, Gary Kilworth. Let's Go to Golgotha. the original novelization of Battlestar Galactica. It says by Glenn A. Larson, but I think it's more Robert Thurston. Fantastic, and I adored this when I was like 8 years old. It was these novelizations that got me reading books that were longer than 150 pages. Magic, you see. That's how you do it. You you use things like novelizations or stories that kids partly know to make them read longer books. That's what tie-ins were often about. It's about reading stamina. Another tie-in that I adored, Trek to Madworld, which involves various villains. It's like the Five Doctors of Star Trek, really, and they end up in a kind of weird, or maybe the Celestial Toymaker of Star Trek, where they're pulled together with villains and they're on a kind of theatrical stage set and they go behind the scenes. Right, Robert Silverberg, Dying Inside, which I read was it early teen or late teen, I think. It's a kind of, oh, he's falling to bits, isn't he? But he can read other people's minds. I remember loving it. My God, look at the print. It's so tiny. Yeah, I love that book. My memories of it have faded somewhat, but Silverberg is always worth a read, I think. It's that genre of kind of psychological science fiction from the 60s. Edmund Cooper, The Overman Culture. Now, he's a bit more space opera-ish, and he had the most wonderful covers in Corgi in the 70s. And I remember when I worked at UEA, we had we invited Terry Pratchett to come and read. We put on these big events for famous authors, and he came and read to 500 people and had a massive signing queue. And we took him out for dinner, and he was a bit grumpy all the way through because he didn't like universities or university people, which was a bit annoying because we had invited him and made a fuss of him, and he sat at dinner in this 1960s style Spanish restaurant with Spanish ladies and tassels everywhere, and he said, "Which of you lot read science fiction?" And the various members of faculty, so we might have read Doris Lessing. "Who's read Edmund Cooper?" he said, and Jeremy piped up and he said, "Paul's reading Edmund Cooper right now," and I was, which was funny, and it was this one, and I liked it. I liked other ones as well by him. That was a funny scene. Some tea. Yes, he was. He was quite grumpy as a visitor. And I know people revere Terry Pratchett, but it was interesting getting the other side of these things when you had to look after writers and you saw what they were like when you had to deal with them. This is my peace and love mug. I love these because they hold about almost a pint. We have mugs in the same style that are even bigger. And if you drink too much coffee from them, if you have two coffees, you go completely off your head. And I got a migraine once. John Christopher, a post-apocalyptic novel called Empty World. He also wrote The Guardians, which I loved, and the Tripods trilogy, as well as science fiction for adults. But I think his books for kids were even better. Now, I'm getting outside of my top 10, really. These are just science fiction books which are on my permanent shelves that I love. It's too hard to make a top 10, I think. This collection is fantastic. Tales Out of Time, edited by Barbara Ierson, who did lots of horror collections at a certain time in the 70s. This is 1979. It's just like a slice of time, and it's stories about time. And there's, obviously H.G. Wells, but John Christopher, Jack Finney, John Wyndham, John Rowe Townsend. It's interesting. And it contains A Sound of Thunder, the Ray Bradbury story, the one about time travel going back to see dinosaurs. The sign on the wall seemed to quaver under a film of sliding warm water. Eccles felt his eyelids blink over his stare, and the sign burned in this momentary darkness. Time Safari, Inc. Safaris to any year in the past, you name the animal, We take you there, you shoot it. That's right, it's about shooting a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was fantastic, Ray Bradbury. Everything is great by him. This is one of the most touching science fiction novels, if not the most upsetting one I've read. Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. About somebody being granted artificial intelligence himself. He becomes cleverer than he ever was, sees everything, and then his powers start to fade. And it's just I can't even go into it too much. It's so touching. It's so lovely. I read it about 12 years ago for the first time, and yeah, I loved it. Yeah, sorry, I'm reading it now. Right, now this is something. This pair of anthologies I read as a kid. The Peter Davison book of Alien Planets, and somewhere I have the other one, Alien Monsters. Fantastic series, published by Sparrow Books, 95p. Distant planets and constant night and burning stars, far-off spheres of horrific heat or deadly cold, lands of awe and wonder, magic and dread, better worlds than ours and worse. Now, Peter Davison, TV's Doctor Who, takes you on a voyage to the deepest, most terrifying corners of the galaxy. 95p. Who could resist? Who could resist any of that? Right. Oh, I'm going to have to speed up, aren't I? Things that aren't tie-ins. How about that? Simak. Shakespeare's Planet was the weirdest book I ever read when I was 12. When I moved from the children's section of Aycliffe Library into the adult section. And I read all the Star Trek books, and then I started looking at Asimov and all those people and finding out who was to my taste. And I read Shakespeare's Planet, and it was so surreal. It was like walking into a Dali landscape. It's all I can describe it as. The Ship Who Sang, Anne McCaffrey. A lovely book about the symbiosis between a ship and its pilot. And I don't get on with all of her books. I've read a few that I just didn't like. And I think she went off. That sounds an awful thing to say about a writer. But I don't think I like her later ones as much. The 60s one, 60s books by her, like Dragonflight, which was the first at the time dragon book. Look at that cover. Corgi books was so good. I thought, oh God, I read this in '89, and I wrote fan letters to her, and she wrote back. She was one of those authors who spent the time to write back to kids, to fans. When is a legend legend? Why is a myth a myth? How old and disused must a fact be for it to be relegated to the category fairy tale? And why do certain facts remain incontrovertible while others lose their validity to assume a shabby, unstable character? It's almost like, because this is a mix of medievalism and science fiction, of techno stuff and dragons and knights, she's kind of in these books demonstrating how, with distance and time and fabulousness, space opera becomes fairy tale. Right. To your scattered bodies go. Philip Jose Farmer. Now, these are strange books. I love these. These are the ones where everybody in humanity wakes up after death, and our hero meets amazing people like Richard Burton, the explorer, like Mark Twain, and they have this kind of adventure in the afterlife, which is actually some kind of alien world. It's a 60s, again, phantasmagoria. Harm's Way, Colin Greenland, which looks like a kind of romance novel in this American edition. Avon Science Fiction. And this is actually, it's a space opera that zigzags around all over the solar system. I loved this book. It had a hint of Angela Carter about it almost. There are, I think, red-skinned angels on Mars, and they're flesh-eating angels. Stuff like that just blew my mind. I was, I don't know, early 20s when I discovered his books. Now, here's something I read as a teenager. The Women's Press science fiction list was fantastic, and Jodie Scott wrote I, Vampire, which was the one I read first. A space vampire has an affair with Virginia Woolf, and Passing for Human, which I think predates it, which also has Virginia Woolf, but also Emma Peel, and Mr. Spock appears in one. It was a time of crazy, mixed up science fiction, which I just loved. Comic, silly, incredibly clever, surreal, and slightly druggy, but also completely queer and feminist. And it could go anywhere. And that was true of lots and lots of the stuff published by the Women's Press science fiction list. Dispatches from the Frontier of the Female Mind was the anthology that they brought out, which is well worth looking for. These things will be disappearing. They weren't reprinted in this form. The Women's Press is long gone, absorbed by the kind of cultural world. And if you ever see them, you must buy them up. They're not all great. Some of them are completely loopy, but that's good. You know, they had the wherewithal to publish brilliance and loopiness in the same list. Now, Terrance Dicks, who wrote the many Doctor Who books, did a series for kids in the late 70s called Star Quest, which was a kind of bit Star Trek, bit Star Wars, and a lot Doctor Who, about a kind of future united nations of planets, which you see, of course, in Star Trek and in Doctor Who and the Tomorrow People. And the first one begins with three cousins being kidnapped, Spacejack, from Stonehenge by these people who seem to be like hideous aliens. One's got tentacles, one's a huge Neanderthal creature, and of course they're the goodies. They're being chased by space Nazis. Book 2 is Robo World, which is very Davros and the Daleks kind of set up on an alien world. And the third in the trilogy, of course, involved dinosaurs on a planet. The whole trilogy is fantastic, I think, and I wish there were more of them. Terrance Dicks will be off to the next thing. He was writing about Mounties or teddy bears or doing more Doctor Who, and he left this group behind. He also did a series of books about horror, universal horror monsters in the present day coming back to life in a series that linked. He wrote those more or less the same time. Marvin's Monsters, the one I remember. And he was delighted when you met him to talk about these other books. He felt they were, look, signed in Bradford to me in 2008. He, yes, obviously his Doctor Who books were talked about more, and he loved talking about his own books. And he's a lovely man. I met him twice. A very influential figure. Right, that will do for science fiction, I think. I had other things I was going to talk about, but I've gone on too long. Maybe I'll do another one quite soon. Let me know in the comments if you'd like more science fiction talk, or if you want more of a mix-up, like I've been doing otherwise. Anyway, do subscribe, do press like, and do leave comments. And I'll see you soon in the next episode. Bye.